All right. Hello, my name is TJ, and today we'll be talking about conversion disorders. So, what is a conversion disorder? Well, as a case study, we're going to talk about a girl named Jessie. So, Jessie is presenting to the ER, reporting shooting pain in her back and both her legs, and she is unable to move her legs. So, that's the situation you're given. She's a middle schooler, and when you ask her about the history of her condition, she reports that she skipped a step on the stairs and got severe back pain that has worsened over a few hours. Her legs have gotten weaker, and her parents have taken her to the ER. Upon your assessments and upon the physician's assessments, there is no central nervous system damage or musculoskeletal damage that would indicate her pain or immobility. So no symptoms, no lesions, no swelling. There are no clues that would cue you into why this is happening. So the question is, why is the reason for this? What do you believe is happening with Jessie? So now we're going to watch a little bit of her story.
I was walking down the stairs at my school and I just skipped a step to get past some people, and I hurt my back quite a bit actually. It didn't hurt as much when I first did it, and then it got harder to walk.
So when we all got home from work that day, we ended up going to Instacare, and the doctor saw her there, took some x-rays, and they didn't really see anything in the x-rays that was of concern.
I went home and it just kind of got worse and worse. My back started to hurt more, and there was shooting pain going down my legs.
So the next morning I went to Intermountain Pediatrics to try and see if we could figure out what was happening. We saw Dr. Clark, and he ordered an emergent MRI, and they couldn't see anything on the MRI that would cause her pain.
He gave us some steroids and some painkillers and sent us home hoping that the pain would go away.
Within the next day or so, I had lost all movement and feeling in my legs.
And so I called the next morning to talk to pediatrics to see if I could get Dr. Clark to give us some more about what it is that we needed to do. And he called me back and said, "You need to take her down to Primary Children's."
And then we stayed there for 4 days, just trying to figure out what was going on, doing tests. And by the end of it, they had diagnosed me with conversion disorder.
So if from the beginning of that video you do not understand, we'll give a definition here. What are conversion disorders? Well, a conversion disorder is a psychiatric disorder characterized by signs and symptoms affecting sensory or motor function inconsistent with patterns of known neurologic diseases or medical conditions and significantly impact the patient's ability to function. So in Jessie's case, nothing was wrong, but she felt that it was, and to the point where she couldn't even move her legs. She was in a wheelchair. So in a nutshell, conversion disorders give the feeling of sensory or motor dysfunction without a direct cause of it. And it can also be known as functional neurological symptom disorder, or FND. And I'll be using conversion disorders and FND interchangeably in this PowerPoint. So how is FND or conversion disorders diagnosed?
How are functional neurological disorders diagnosed? A lot of people still think that the diagnosis of a functional neurological disorder, or FND, is a diagnosis of exclusion. This means that it is diagnosed after doctors have done a lot of tests and cannot come up with an answer as to what is causing the problems. You can imagine that this doesn't give doctors and patients a lot of confidence in the diagnosis. What if the test wasn't good enough? Or the doctors have just ordered the wrong test? But that is not the way it is done. The diagnosis of FND should be made based on positive findings that patients have on examination. One example of this are tremors, uncontrollable shaking of a body part that settle down with distraction. Another example is Hoover's sign. Let's say you suffer from functional weakness in one leg and you are weak when trying to push this leg down. When your doctor asks you to push your other leg up against resistance though, the strength in the affected leg improves. Not only does this approach avoid getting the diagnosis wrong, but it can help patients understand what is causing the problem and what can be done about it. The problem with functional movement disorders is that the voluntary control of movements has gone wrong and the brain is working too hard on them, but the automatic control is still working.
All right, so it is not only a diagnosis of exclusion, but it is the healthcare's job to exclude other physical or neurological disorders that would cause such symptoms. That's how we make sure that this is FND instead of, say, paralysis due to an injury. But it does have positive signs that can accompany it. So, like the video said, tremors that settle down upon distraction, or muscle weakness that goes away when the focus of the brain is on a different muscle. Diagnosis would be one or more symptoms of altered voluntary, motor, or sensory function. Another way to diagnose this would be a symptom or deficit that results in a severe condition that warrants medical evaluation. So Jesse, in this case, was in a wheelchair. That's not compatible with being a middle schooler, as middle schoolers run around, like to have fun, like to hang out with friends. So it was a severe condition that needed to be treated. I would just like to note the gray area in this condition. There can be a vast array of symptoms, more neurological symptoms, more body symptoms, and there's a lot that's unknown about FND and the reason for it. So we have to be really careful when we diagnose it. All right, so now that we know how it's diagnosed, how is it treated? How do we manage FND? Again, there is a cognitive and there's a physical component to this piece. And so we'll start with the cognitive therapies. It all centers around finding the triggers of FND and working against it for the patient's benefit. So a certain trigger would be finding the predisposing factors in the brain that led to FND, and through therapy, through cognitive behavioral therapy, talking with the patient, talking through it, talking through past traumas, past events that may have triggered the situation, and trying to work past that. We can also use pharmacotherapy. So by altering the hormones in the brain, you can reduce the anxieties and reduce the triggers or the effect of the triggers that was on the brain that caused the brain to have FND. And then there's also transmagnetic stimulation. There's not a lot of publishing studies about this therapy, but it may have effects that can change the symptoms. Then we go on to physical therapies. So this is pretty simple as physical therapy, but by encouraging the body to regain function, one can train the mind against FND symptoms. So if you were to watch the rest of the video, Jessie goes through months of physical therapy, and then one day she just learns to run and sprint on the same day, and she had fully worked past her cognitive block there. All right, why might Jessie have received her FND diagnosis? In essence, what caused her FND? So Jessie might have received this diagnosis for a couple different reasons. There's two theories of thought. So there's a psychodynamic model and a cognitive behavioral model. So the psychodynamic model believes that a conversion disorder is a product of manifesting emotional conflict within the person. And so somebody is so emotionally conflicted that it gets repressed and gets converted into a symptom. So in this case, Jessie may have had emotional struggle in her brain, and then on a day where she hurt her back a little bit, it just manifested into a full-on shooting leg pain wheelchair condition. And so again, earlier in life, before the diagnosis, there's inadequate coping of something or negative interpersonal relationships. And then later in life, the patient encounters a traumatic event in which these mechanisms make or turn into a disorder. And then there's the cognitive behavioral model. This model promotes that a conversion disorder is a product of past bodily trauma, and then the individual's memory of that trauma manifests itself into a condition. This can also be a fear of that trauma. So in this case, Jessie might have hurt her back before, or she might have been afraid to be in a wheelchair. And so by skipping a step and hurting her back a little bit, it manifested into a full-blown wheelchair condition. Again, earlier in life, there's a traumatic event, or patient manifests fear of a traumatic event, and then later there's a trigger that activates this fear or this memory, and it manifests itself physically. And then the potential risk factors with these two theories would be past events of emotional trauma, previously increased fear of a specific injury, a past injury or traumatic event, and or prevalence of factors that would remind the person of a past traumatic event, like students that would remind Jessie of the time that she fell down in second grade. So special considerations when we're dealing with patients with these disorders is building a therapeutic relationship. It can be very isolating to the patient when we say, oh, there's nothing actually wrong with you, it's all in your head. And it can make it seem like the healthcare team isn't trying hard enough to diagnose or to help their problem. And so by gaining an accurate health history and really partnering with the patient, one can make them feel heard and seen while they're affected by such a bizarre condition. And then the second consideration is we want to individualize their care. There can be so many different conditions and different triggers and different symptoms that a FND patient might have. And so we want to make sure that they are known and seen, and we are catering our care plan to help them. Yeah, and that's just a summary of what I said. There's no way to blanket these people under one care plan. Thanks for watching this video. These are my references, and yeah, see you later.